So welcome to all of you, and I am really so excited to kick off the second year of programming for the Climate Equity LA series of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office. This set of public Zoom workshops is intended to raise awareness about the climate crisis as well as climate solution and address how the city of Los Angeles can advance equity in all of our climate, energy, and environmental policies, programs, and projects. My name is Michelle Pritchard, as Andre said, and I serve as the Senior Director for Strategic Initiatives at the Liberty Hill Foundation. And I hope many of you are familiar with Liberty Hill, but for those who may not be, we are a 46-year-old public foundation working to advance social justice across Los Angeles through a change, not charity approach. We do this through grants to grassroots groups, through training programs and alliance building with community-based organizations. And Liberty Hill has truly been honored to serve as a partner and a co-sponsor of the Climate Equity LA series since 2021, when the CEMO, the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, as we fondly call it, was founded through the organizing efforts of environmental justice and Native groups who joined together into the LEAP Coalition. And you're going to hear more about CEMO's mission, current and future work in just a moment. You know, just I think 2 days ago, the UN panel on climate change released its most recent scientific report. And once again, they sounded the alarm. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, quote, "Humanity is on thin ice, and that ice is melting fast. Our world needs climate action on all fronts, everything, everywhere, all at once." The report underscored that while the situation is truly dire, we still have the chance to turn this around through bold targets and concrete, accelerated, and unswerving action. So tonight we have a very substantive and engaging program, and we appreciate all of you taking time to be with us and learn about the City of Angels and how it's tackling the climate crisis and working alongside frontline groups to figure out how to create and implement equitable climate solutions that will directly benefit our most vulnerable neighborhoods and people. So as we begin the kickoff program for this year, I am very pleased and honored to introduce you to Rudy Ortega Jr., the tribal president of the Fernandino Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. President Ortega is a descendant of the Simi, Santa Clarita, and San Fernando Valleys. With a strong passion in tribal affairs, he began shadowing his father, the late Rudy Ortega Sr., when he was just a child. He was first elected as vice president for the Tataviam at the age of 18. Through this role, he assisted in the continuing efforts of the tribe's mission of protecting the rights of the Fernandino Tataviam as Native American people. President Ortega assisted the tribe in reinvigorating their nonprofit arm, the Puku Cultural Community Services, in 2004 to provide programs to Native Americans living in LA County, as well as to sustain the Fernandino Tataviam community. President Ortega is also a commissioner on the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission, helping to support the office and advance their recommendations to city leaders. He will provide us with a moment of reflection on the sacred and unceded land that we occupy here in the city of Los Angeles. President Ortega.
Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, hello everyone. Would like to acknowledge the first peoples of Los Angeles, the Gabrielino Tongva people, Gabrielino Kish, the Venturino Chumash, and then my tribe as well, the Fernandino, the Tataviam Band of Mission Indians. And in the traditional way, we open up and we welcome people who come into a gathering as such in an honor way. So the song I'm going to sing is Paco, which means enter. Gima means come. So I'd like to sing that song in a respectful way to welcome everybody to this webinar today. Paco Kima Paco Kima Paco Kima Mena Kima Mena Kima Paco Kima Paco Kima Paco Kima Mena Kima Mena Kima Paco Kima Paco Kima Paco Kima Mena Kima Mena Kima So with that, just welcome everybody to the ancestral lands of our tribes, where many of our people are still here today. We gather in these spaces and sacred places from these traditional villages throughout Los Angeles. So we welcome you to this webinar today. Thank you.
Thank you, President Ortega, for that very special song and blessing, and for sharing your unique history and experience of your people with our gathering here tonight. And of course, we will be coming back to talk with you for a fuller conversation with Marta Segura a little later in the program. So next, I'm going to introduce Marta Segura, but I wanted to share a few quick highlights of last year's Climate Equity LA series with all of you. In 8 workshops from March through May of 2022, we brought together over 450 participants from 172 different organizations and agencies. We featured over 30 speakers, including community-based organizations, research institutions, nonprofit policy advocates, and government staff. Small group breakout discussions took place in every one of the workshops and brought community residents in dialogue with policy experts in conversations on equitable pathways for implementing climate policies. We considered a lot of different topics. They included building decarbonization and its impacts on low-income renters and jobs. We spent 3 sessions considering community-driven climate resilience strategies and how to protect the most vulnerable among us. Our final workshop looked at the potential of President Biden's Justice 40 initiative for LA and California. And all of these previous high-quality workshops are available on the CEMO website, and you will also find reports on each topic with key takeaways and key recommendations that resulted from the discussion groups. So now it's my pleasure to introduce a longtime colleague and friend, Marta Segura, who is, of course, the founding executive director of the Climate Emergency Mobilization Office, and who was also appointed last year to serve as the City of LA's Chief Heat Officer. Marta is actually one of 10 Chief Heat Officers worldwide, and she is the only Latina in the country to serve in these 2 respective roles. And in fact, Marta has been a trailblazer much of her life. She was also the first Latina program director for the UCLA Labor, Occupational Safety and Health Program at UCLA, and the first statewide organizer in Los Angeles for Communities for a Better Environment during its early years in Southern California, and later she became their statewide associate director. Marta pioneered the community co-design of parks and open spaces in the early years with the Los Angeles Neighborhood Land Trust, and with her master's degree in public health from UCLA, she also served as program officer for the California Endowment, one of the largest philanthropies in California. Marta has also held many voluntary leadership positions as well, serving as planning commissioner for the City of LA and as the founding chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee for the LA League of Conservation Voters, while also serving as a board member there. Marta is truly committed to building and connecting community voices to achieve healthier, thriving, climate-adapted communities for all. As the daughter of cannery workers herself, she knows all too well what it is like to grow up with childhood asthma, with intense air pollution, living next to freeways, and displacement. And I think for all who know Marta, they will agree that she is very, very passionate about her role in shaping equitable climate policy for the City of LA. So please join me in welcoming Marta Segura, our Chief Heat Officer and Climate Emergency Mobilization Executive Director. Marta, over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, for that really amazing introduction. And also thank you, President Ortega, for that song and blessing, which honors not only the first people and our ancestors, but also recognizes that we have a lot to learn about stewarding Mother Earth of this land, water, and all life so we can not just coexist, but support habitable, livable Earth for all of us. I also want to thank the Creator and ancestors for those blessings. So good evening and welcome to our second annual Climate Equity LA series, which focuses on both extreme heat and climate adaptation. And it's also my honor to share with you that this year is even more centered on voices of the EJ frontline communities in Los Angeles. We will lift their voices in our series to be front and center and include climate leaders to respond to their recommendations and experiences. Our Climate Emergency Mobilization Office at the City of LA launched the Climate Equity LA series to strengthen our community-driven engagement and guide how we shape more equitable climate policy for Los Angeles. We offer you both EJ community speakers and First People leaders that are rooted in community wisdom and stewardship of our health and Mother Earth. They are the collective voice of reason and solutions to our climate crisis. I thank everyone, though, for their contributions and hard work to move the needle toward climate and environmental justice. In our first year, we covered the following areas, and these topics were co-designed by frontline communities to correlate with policy areas that the City Council was also considering. Michelle mentioned community-driven climate resilience, new and existing building decarbonization, and an overview of Justice 40 and the need for climate equity metrics at the city level. There were many lessons, but also achievements. We were successful in innovating governance by applying the wisdom of community in our equitable building decarbonization report, which informed our commission and then our City Council to reconsider a more multi-phased and equity-focused approach for existing building decarbonization. Now it seems the entire world is focused on equitable building decarbonization, and our City Council took notice and opted for a more cautious yet more effective approach. They will reconsider a policy for existing building decarbonization once more, but this time with the wisdom of community guiding them. So this is an example of how our CELA series works. We also are conducting extensive focus groups on extreme heat and climate adaptation in very diverse communities of Los Angeles that we will then use in our policy reports and our heat relief campaign, our outreach materials, all as part of an overall plan to reduce excess deaths and hospitalizations due to extreme heat. We have also integrated the UCLA heat risk map into our work to advise city departments and leaders such as the Emergency Management Department, the Bureau of Engineers, the Department of Water and Power, the Mayor's Office of Public Safety, and others on how and where to decarbonize city buildings and where we can provide greater access to resilient centers and cooling centers to save lives. CEMO also hopes to create greater access to federal funds and state funds to Los Angeles as a whole and to help us align with Justice 40, which we'll talk about in a minute. Today's launch and series is an opportunity to further how we can apply an equity lens to the climate investments of the renewable energy and green transition, from the Inflation Reduction Act to the final harrowing warnings of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is a United Nations body that assesses the science related to climate change. They released what they state is our final warning to prevent an inhabitable Earth and climate in their sixth report. This report lifts the vulnerability of the most disinvested communities worldwide. It shows us that in our haste to find market-driven and technological solutions, we have underestimated the impacts of all pollution. We must go beyond a carbon analysis and carbon capture to solve our worldwide challenges of disappearing land, islands, and water, which are devastating millions of people into despair and causing mass migrations of people who have lost their natural homes to corporate agriculture, energy companies, massive deforestation, or worse yet, to civil wars that destabilize environments and create accelerated climate chaos. Millions of people have been displaced worldwide and in the United States and will continue to be displaced. We like to say that people come to California for the weather. However, if you came to California, you are likely escaping the harsher climate of the rest of the nation, and you too may be a climate refugee, right? Next, I'd like to talk about extreme heat and weather. We now have heat seasons instead of a single heat wave, We know that Los Angeles's primary climate hazard is extreme heat. And in addition, we've all just experienced tornadoes, hail, and flooding, historic storms in LA that no one was expecting last year. We are still awaiting the investments needed to upgrade our nation's infrastructure to protect us from extreme weather and extreme heat. So yes, our focus must be on creating healthier, thriving communities while preserving our humanity and culture as we create good paying green jobs, build our climate-ready infrastructure, and simultaneously reach our climate, housing, and health goals. Nobody wins unless we all recognize that climate solutions correlate with supporting and investing in our most historically disinvested communities worldwide. If we pay close attention to their wisdom, we can make that leap. Still, the city of Los Angeles can be an example for the rest of the nation. We can arrest the climate crisis by taking action to invest first where the pollution emissions are the greatest, where the health disparities are off the charts, and where we maximize our economic investments and correlate them with healthy housing and needed infrastructure. LA has many great examples of creating more equity-driven climate solutions that are the model already for our nation. This year, my office will align with the Department of the City Planning to offer a city-specific climate vulnerability assessment to ensure we are aligning equity-based climate goals with President Biden's Justice 40, so we can measure that at least 40%, but hopefully more, of our infrastructure and climate investments go to these very communities, and for good reason. The City of LA is also launching a citywide equity index that will integrate equitable climate goals and screening tools. We won't ever get to climate solutions with piecemeal technological solutions spread out to those who can afford them first. We need a strategy that aligns with equitable climate goals and Biden's Justice 40, and CEMO will focus on all of that this year. We will only reach our goals by targeting and being intentional about those investments and these frontline communities, and we hope our sister cities and others will follow this example. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll slow down for a second because we have a real wonderful guest, video guest at that. I would like us next to welcome Mayor Karen Bass. I want to turn your attention to our mayor, who really needs no introduction. Before Mayor Bass was even elected, she honored CEMO by giving us a few words of her on her former website. And her words aligned with our goals for more meaningful engagement of communities to reach our climate goals. I would be remiss if I did not mention that affordable, healthy housing is deeply interconnected to a just climate policy. Why, you ask? It's those that live in poor housing that suffer the most consequences during heat waves and climate change. Also, the unhoused constitute 50% of those that perish during heat waves. It's also those that already pay more than 50% of their wages towards rent that suffer most from increasing energy costs, like the ones created recently by SoCalGas. This makes people have to choose between paying rent and paying for gas, and that shouldn't be. That should not be a choice for anyone to make. So our approach to equitable climate and extreme heat policy is deeply aligned with Mayor Bass's goal of providing healthy, affordable housing for all. In doing so, we not only save lives, we also will revive our humanity and show our children that every life is sacred. I now have the honor of introducing you all to Mayor Karen Bass, who needs no introduction. Thank you so much.
I'm Mayor Karen Bass, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the second annual Climate Equity LA Series. I want to thank Marta Segura for convening this series and recognize our new Deputy Mayor for Energy and Sustainability, Nancy Sutley, and Deputy Mayor for Infrastructure, Randall Winston. Our Climate Emergency Mobilization Office is building a bridge between climate action and community needs, and we are glad to have you all here to talk about the work ahead. Climate change is among the greatest challenges facing our city, and no one has felt the impact of this crisis more than you and your communities, which are the most polluted and health burdened and have the least access to economic mobility. The climate hazards facing communities of color, from extreme heat and urban heat islands to air pollution, energy poverty, and a lack of mobility, are each crises in and of themselves. That's why when we talk about climate action, we must prioritize vulnerable neighborhoods and put environmental justice at the center of our work. As a former community organizer, I know the power that community members bring to addressing the most pressing challenges facing our city. I saw firsthand how community engagement can shape city, state, and national policies. So I want to thank you for rising to the challenge, for working tirelessly to find the root causes of the injustices in our city and pushing leaders to do more. But we have a long way to go, and the challenges ahead are significant, but I know that when we lock arms, we can and we will build a more resilient and healthy Los Angeles for every Angelino. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Bass, for those moving and inspirational words. I definitely feel like we're locking virtual arms right now with you, Mayor Bass, and we hope that the next time that we get together, it'll be in person and we can all be here to really lock arms. So now I have the honor to reintroduce to you President Rudy Ortega and Michelle Pritchard for our fireside chat. I'll start with Michelle's introduction and then move on to President Ortega. Michelle Pritchard, as mentioned earlier, is the Director of Strategic Initiatives who co-founded Environmental Health and Justice Program for the Liberty Hill Foundation, which guides collaborative efforts to change public participation through cutting-edge research, alliance building, and community organizing, including current efforts to establish a healthier green zones away from toxic hotspots, away from oil drilling. Michelle has been instrumental in designing and implementing processes to gather community to ensure that we eliminate oil drilling from communities that can least take those exposures and emissions. We want to thank Michelle for all that she has done to catalyze and inspire the environmental justice movement in Los Angeles. Thank you, Michelle. And then I'd like to also reintroduce President Rudy Ortega. So basically, a call to action must be a unified approach among cities and municipalities and tribal governments. We need to ensure that we have equal partnership with these tribal governments to eliminate these health hazards and to assure that tribal governments have a historical place in creating a climate solutions in a climate-friendly world. So this is one of the many reasons I'm honored to welcome President Rudy Ortega Jr., because through his role as president of his tribe, he leads the executive branch of his tribe in administering the body of government's responsibility for upholding the Constitution, code, and ordinances of his people. I won't repeat what Michelle said earlier, but I will say President Ortega has also been instrumental for the government's Truth and Healing Council, as he is also developing a climate action and climate adaptation plan for the tribal communities. We are honored to have you with us today, President Ortega, and I am honored to work with you on our commission. So why don't we start with President Ortega? I'd like you to share a few words about what you believe it means to be at the forefront of guiding your tribe's first climate action and adaptation plan and aligning it with the government, the state, the municipalities, and bringing the voices of First Peoples to the forefront.
Thank you, Martha, for that. And one thing for us as our tribal nation is we've been invisible and we've been moved aside and been told to forget about our heritage and our culture and our traditions. And so bringing that up, Los Angeles doesn't have a federally recognized tribe. And that's no fault to our tribes, no fault to the Gabrielinos or Pritchard Tree Masher to mine. It was literally meant to move ourselves, move to be moved away for the powers to be to come in and acquire the land, acquire the minerals for their purpose and their agendas. So for me to come in and to look at the structure and to collaborate, and one of the things that we've done is that we teamed up with Gabrielino Tongva, with the Land Conservancy, and looking at how we can acquire some property back to our own hands as well. so we can re-educate our young ones the traditions of maintaining land more correctly, more properly. Because as you've seen in years past, California has dealt with many wildfires. And so that was the importance of us, importance for me to really step into this space and to deliver a lot of information and to engage in the discussions as far as climate resiliency and the importance of the emergency of our climate here. Especially in Los Angeles, in the last few months, we've seen how much water has come down. We're now seeing in the news today tornadoes hitting California, and it's unheard of or haven't seen in centuries. So it's important that we understand the climate and how Mother Nature works and the traditions that my ancestors have been taught and learn and pretty much bring that infrastructure into the science of what cities and the governments want to enforce or put into better practice so that we have a better chance of it. And one thing you said, it's important, the equality to it. Like, growing up in communities that children are acquiring asthma. And for us as a tribal people, we're in those communities of disparity. We still are. And so for me, I live in the northeast part of Los Angeles in the San Fernando Valley, where we have the freeways, the airports, all the landfills, all of those area things that pretty much bring the disadvantagement to our communities for healthy living, for good air quality, and for pretty much staying cool during summertime and staying warm during wintertime. So that's the reason why I stepped into this space to really open the door and really come in and open it for the other tribal folks that are really in tune to advancing and learning more and participating in these initiatives to be more aware in how they can deliver the information to share across the table. But definitely bring the voice of the tribes. That's my sole purpose, is to make sure that the tribes are at the table in discussion, and that we're here and our communities are here within Los Angeles and throughout the county as well, but to engage in those conversations and making sure that we are there and be able to bring our traditions and have the open spaces. Because sometimes some of these policies that we look at, I've seen, has infringed on our own traditional practices. So when you infringe on that, then we have no more space. And we've always been told not to have access to open spaces. And so that's the important part of it. And if we go gather, for example, for our traditional baskets, we're actually weeding out the landscape. We're removing some vegetation that will reduce fire fuel. So those are some of the traditions that we find that's important and find that they continue to traditioning forward to the next generation, but it begins in a space like this. And if we're not at the table, those policy goes in and the tribes are not allowed to continue practicing tradition, but also too, that tradition helps with climate resiliency, helps understand why the climate needs to change or why we need to adapt and move into the space and bring better quality of air and water to our communities. So that's the purpose for my involvement, really.
Thank you, President Ortega. That's really helpful for us to hear that Native practices such as weeding the land to create baskets is part of a wildfire prevention strategy that has existed for generations. And we have forgotten so many of the Native practices that could be helpful to us today. And we're very honored to be relearning, right, those practices so that we can integrate them, not just individually, but as a systems change for our governments, both local, state, and federal, so that not only are we locking arms with tribal communities and their practices, but we are remembering our own ancestors and our own practices that should be part of the future solutions as we humanize policy, as we humanize our practices, we actually create a better world for our children. So, Michelle, I'm going to transition to you. You have been at the forefront of catalyzing the environmental justice movement, but I've heard you many times advocate for the integration of First People into our spaces, into funding, into philanthropy, so that we can make sure that what President Ortega is advocating for comes to realization. Can you comment on what you've seen in the last year or two with regards to philanthropy making a move to the integration of First People?
Yes, thank you, Martin. I think that's a great question. And I just want to, ask, like, what really could be more central to environmental justice in this time and in this place than supporting Indigenous people in reviving their relationship with the land? I think it's truly central, and I'm very encouraged to see the recognition, the effort to struggle with figuring out ways to go beyond land acknowledgements and to make our actions more meaningful. So I think progress is being made. As always, there's further to go, and we need to go faster. I would say Liberty Hill has tried to do its best to provide funding to Sacred Places Institute, the Puku Community Center over time. But I know just in this last year, we have an Environment and Justice Giving Circle at Liberty Hill, which made 2 grants for land conservation directly to the Tataviam as well as to the Gabrielino Tongva tribe, so that they can begin that process of rematriating land, to do the cultural harvesting that President Ortega mentioned, and to teach future generations. So I think philanthropy as a whole is grappling and seeking ways to make this new consciousness and awareness real. So and we, again, have a long way to go, but I think that we're getting started.
Right. Yeah, and I think that complements well what the governor has has initiated with the Truth and Healing Councils, right? He announced recently in his budget proposal that he wanted to establish a $100 million funding opportunity to strengthen partnerships with the California Native American tribes. And I recently attended a Truth and Healing Council and had the honor of just observing how effective those conversations, those healing conversations can be. And I heard the word strong medicine. We all need strong medicine to have a more united approach, and remember that this is the only way that we can make this kind of transformation happen. So maybe on that note, we can talk a little bit more about this land back, and how effective this can be, not just in California, but across the nation, to both rematriate the land to the First People, but also to preserve biodiversity and life, and also focus on nature-based solutions to ensure the climate and planet Earth is adapted to a future that is more resilient. So maybe President Ortega, you'd like to talk a little bit more to us about the land back and the things that you have heard in these conversations.
Yeah, I believe, across the nation, that's one of the main topics. Is all of the United States, all of North and South Americas is indigenous lands. And Native people have come across these territories with ease and with traditions that make them migrate back and forth. But here, in Los Angeles, what we're focused on, both my tribe and Gabrielino and others alike across the state, is the access to land return. And the purpose of it, as I briefly described a little bit ago, is to really, have that reconnection to the land. My tribe, we have a website called Acknowledgement, and it was really instrumentally brought on by the tribe up in Seattle that created Real Rent. And so we spoke with them, and we acquired, and we did the same thing here. But on our website, we talk about the amount of property that the tribe had land granted to us from these villages that were traditional. Like my great grandmother, Maria Lipas, had inherited 4,400 acres of property, which was Los Encinos, and all taken away. And by the age she was 18, 19 years old, a young woman, mother, and land was taken completely away from her. Had we maintained that property, that would have been reservation land today, right in the southern portion of the San Fernando Valley. And throughout the valley, there's other portions. So there's 3 lineages within my tribe, and each of those lineages had land granted to them. We had Tahunga area to our Garcia family. We had where Universal Studios is today, the Coenga property to our Ortiz lineage. And then where the Van Nomeric complex is at, where the water for Los Angeles comes in from Northern California, was actually another land grant that was into the tribe's hands. So when we talk about land return, land back, it's really the tradition, the Amish of pretty much respectfully returning property that we were dispossessed and that were forcefully taken from us. And so that's what we're asking for, is so that we can have that reconnection to this properties, to traditions. And to us, land is kin. Land is vital. It is what we use to teach, and is what is used to really grow with and adapt to it as well. So we don't want to change the way the structure of the land was. We want to learn how do we adapt ourselves to it and how do we grow from it. And that goes along with the climate. So when we talk about today in Los Angeles, when we have lawns throughout Los Angeles area, we now realize that's not the right thing to do. But the tribal people, we knew that. We only knew that we used native plant species because they're resistant to this area. They knew how to live with the minimum water instead of bringing so much water from the north. So those are the things that we've had known for centuries. And that's what land return brings to us. And it allows us to get reacquainted, like I said, back to the properties and the land of it. And all these properties that I spoke about, they sit in because they were taken from us because they have natural springs. Encino Park, Los Encinos State Park, still has a natural spring still flowing, has feeds the pond, has lots of water there. In the city of San Fernando, we had another area of property to one of our tribal captains. It was 20 acres and it had a spring on there. And that was used for the city to use to have its water source. So definitely those are the purpose and reasons. And so when we look at land return and struggle for it, and that's what we as tribes ask for. So how do we build ourselves up? How do, especially in Los Angeles, as I mentioned, non-federal, state recognized, state organized, historically here, never given up our sovereignty. How do we move ourselves and educate our people when that's one fundamental key piece of sovereignty? And so that's what we look at as land returns. And that definitely, as you said, in the Truth and Healing Councils, it's about healing and returning. And I think it's on both sides of the aisle. I think those that now call Los Angeles home, that are not traditionally from here, from the indigenous tribes, and how we share that space. And I think that's the fundamental piece of the land return.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, Michelle.
That's so informative to me, and I'm sure to many people here, President Ortega. So thank you for sharing that. I wanted to just bring forth something that I heard last week, which I thought was so thoughtful, offered by Professor John Christensen at UCLA, who stood in to do a land acknowledgement as we opened a conference last week on the Justice 40 initiative, which we may talk about a little later. But he said this with regard to the land acknowledgements, that of course we want to really work to do the land rematriation, but that we need to go beyond those to the good hard work of building relationships, respect, reciprocity, and reparations. So I thought that was just really thoughtful, the 4 R's: relationships, respect, reciprocity, and reparations, which does make me want to ask a question. I know that there has been a task force at the state level working to think creatively about the issue of reparations to African Americans, to Black people in California. Is there a similar task force working to do the same for the Native American community?
Currently, none that I'm aware of. The only thing that will come closer is this Truth and Healing Council, that there's a space for those conversations. and the space to bring up such items of discussion. And I know that's a discussion that's very heavy lifted. So looking forward for those future discussions if we were to move in that space.
Mhm. Yeah. So I guess the question is, over the long term, how might local governments and even the state government be informed by native wisdom and native practices to achieve our climate adaptation and heat adaptation goals? There's so much rich wisdom there that I think some of which you've mentioned today, President Ortega, but the question is, how do we operationalize that? How do we make that a reality? And I think we have that same question with Justice 40. How do governments shift their systems to this reality that we need to listen to the wisdom from our communities and wisdom from First People, and then also quantify it, measure it? How do we measure the no less than 40% of these investments going to tribal communities, going to environmental justice communities, and then make it a reality? I can speak as a city leader that we have created an equity index at the city of Los Angeles. It's really in its first phase, right? But we really need community voices to step up and look at this equity index and tell us what's missing. Tell us what more needs to be integrated so that we can begin to create the kind of difference that we can envision together as a community, right? But I was wondering if either of you had any other ideas on how we can make these recommendations and wisdoms of reality within local government. Because it's not just about the money, right? It's not just about allocating $100 million. There's so much more to this. And some of it, maybe Michelle, you were nailing it, right? It's about respect. It's about relationship. It's about reconnecting and having these conversations.
Definitely. I think one, you got tribes in different scales. And I can say for the tribes that don't have federal acknowledgement, that are still struggling, such as my counterpart tribes like Gabrielino and Intrino Chumach, who would love to be at the table. But equity financially, it's difficult for them. And our elders are very few. And as each day goes by, we lose an elder who carries that knowledge. So it's just truly a race, and how we bring them to the table, where now we've seen the last year and a half, 2 years, all the state agencies, the local agencies have now tapped onto the tribes, and it has become overwhelming. So truthfully, it is a task that, how do we definitely bring that knowledge that they have and they're willing to share? Because many tribes still today, many elders are reluctant because of the past of what had occurred. And I could speak to experience of my father, who came to a lot of stakeholder meetings, and a lot of time, he wasn't all well financially to leave his job to come to a meeting that took this time and took the knowledge, and then there was no gratitude towards that afterwards. So truthfully, that's the piece of it. That's how do we bring these folks and able to bring these folks and allow them to come and bring them as experts, the knowledge that they carry, and bring them on and assign them. That's something that within my tribe, we're constantly struggling. How do we strategize ourselves? There's very few of us, and there's so many opportunities for discussion, but how do we navigate into the discussions to allow for these elders, and not really taxing them out too, because they get over it exhausted. I have elders telling me, hey, I'm done. I said this here, and it sounds like I'm repeating myself at the next meeting. So, it's how do we coordinate it and structure it where, I guess, unison, the state, the county, and the city agencies can really look at what is that toolkit and how is that platform. So this way, we can do something that's useful across the board, and then adapt and measure it, as you said, against the knowledge that the elders or the cultural bearers have about maintaining or bringing that advice or opinion to the table as well.
Yes, Michelle.
Well, I think there's a great similarity, although far more acute, facing the Native American community, but I think there's a similar trend happening for environmental justice organizations, certainly in our region. They are so stretched to attend, get up to speed, study the policy implications, talk with their members. In order to have a truly authentic engagement process, it takes time and it takes resources to be able to do that. And I know, Marta, we have certainly had that discussion in the CEMO office, but I see it across the board in city and county and state government. I think the good news here is that there has been an awakening in government to think about fair compensation for, civic, nonprofit, Native groups, in recognition of the time and expertise that it takes to engage. And now everyone wants to do it, but there's not enough resources to really go around and do it well. So that's a task ahead for us. And just to finalize, I think local government itself doesn't always have the resources to be able to even staff their own work. We're hearing this at this time. So, there's a lot of work to do on income redistribution in our city, our county, our world, cause of all this. But I did want to just, play off of the very important point that President Ortega made.
Right. Agreed. I think we are in a race to memorialize and listen to the voices of wisdom from our elders and from First People and environmental justice communities as well. And that's one of the reasons I think CEMO was created, to help to ensure that those voices are memorialized, are heard, are repeated within the context, in my case, of local government, so that those reports that we're creating can be delivered to commissions and can be delivered to council and are authentic to the recommendations being made by our communities, right? But we need more of this, and we're still learning how to innovate and improve our process to ensure that those voices are meaningfully heard and meaningfully implemented in the context of our local government. But it is definitely something new for many of us, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity that we have to try to innovate. But I also feel the pressure of the fatigue out there in our communities to participate in really different conversations, because I see, questions here. How do we ensure we have EV and charging and solar for our tenants? Valid questions, super important questions. How do we get distributed energy resources to the most vulnerable communities? How do we assess which communities get the resources first? Some of them are very technical conversations. Some of them are very policy-oriented conversations. And we have different languages, right? Not just, we're all speaking English perhaps, but we're speaking different practices, different languages in terms of what we feel the priorities are and how to implement them. And then aligning all of that, policies, technologies, and native wisdom and community wisdom is really, I think, the task ahead for local and state government, to make sure we're listening and to make sure we're hearing and to make sure we're aligning what the resources that must be implemented and must be operationalized are allocated to the areas that are most needed. So it's quite the task. So I'm glad I'm not in this alone. I'm glad that we have the communities, we have First People, we have the commission and the representation in that commission of some of the most vulnerable communities in LA that are the most pollution burdened. But I want to make sure that we circle this back to Justice 40 and talk a little bit about Justice 40 and how we hope that the resources from the Inflation Reduction Act and the climate infrastructure investments come to Los Angeles and what we envision them being able to accomplish. So I'll start with you first, President Ortega. Do you want to offer some thoughts about how the tribal community has directed its recommendations to the federal government on those investments.
For us, we're still in the gathering stage of materials with our community, because it's a difficult task to reach out to the tribal communities, and as you said, we share the space in Los Angeles. So our neighbor who's not tribal also experienced the same experiences we do. And so as we gather, we're realizing it's a bigger scope. So we want to be thorough and be able to get the input from our tribal folks, and not only them, but also the neighborhoods that we are in as well. So our surrounding neighbors, because we find that just as important. So that's where we're at right now on that, and we're looking forward to continue working towards that and with our team and doing a lot more outreach, because I think that's the important part. That's the thing that we're talking about, is how do we get the voice from the voiceless so that we can voice it out.
That's right. And Michelle, do you want to talk a little bit about the Justice 40 conference that Liberty Hill just hosted? Yeah.
Sure, happy to just give quick highlights from that. And I'm happy to see there are a number of participants this evening who were there. But last week, Liberty Hill, along with the Resources Legacy Fund, put together a conference with about 150 people all together from the city and county. We were hosting the Senior Director for Environmental Justice at the White House Council for Environmental Quality, who really helped us kind of spearhead the whole gathering. And we had probably 6 different agencies that sent senior staff to come and share information about their programs, from the Department of Energy, the US EPA, Department of Transportation, Department of Interior, which of course does a lot of Native American and tribal affairs, Health and Human Services, and HUD. So all, very major programs. And indeed, there are billions of dollars that are in the pipeline to come out to local communities to meet the Justice 40 goal of making sure that at least 40% of the benefits really do make a difference for disadvantaged, overpolluted, disinvested communities, including tribal nations. So I will say that it is going to be a steep hill for all of us to climb together. And we're going to have to do it together, because much of this funding will only come through local government, through our cities and counties and municipalities, but they will be required to work with the nonprofit sector, with the tribal communities, to shape projects. So we are trying to do our best to figure out what makes the most sense, to provide information about what is available, to provide support in the form of grant writers, to provide support for nonprofits who maybe need the back end, the auditing and accounting and compliance requirements that you must have when you accept federal funds. So, but I will say it's exciting at the same time that there's actually some, which we identified a few minutes ago, just the resources to actually address some of these historic disinvestments.
Right. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, and I think you mentioned some of the challenges and obstacles there of receiving federal funds that really challenge our local communities and local CBOs. I did hear from some organizations that there is a initiative to restructure some of the RFPs so that they are not as challenging for local CBOs. So I'd like to definitely keep tabs on that and share that information in the future. Yeah. And having been at your conference, I will say that it was really encouraging that the federal representatives there were so eager to learn from the community representatives. Like they also feel like they are starting something new and changing the way that things have been done in the past. But this transition, although it offers opportunities, it's going to offer obstacles and challenges that we need to overcome together.
Yes.
Yes, and I see Andres's hand up. All good? Great. I think I wanted to thank you both so very much for the amazing, insightful conversation about how First People, particularly those from Los Angeles and environmental justice communities, have a role to play in how we structure government resources and investments, how we create climate solutions for all, and how we have this conversation so that we are moving forward together and disentangling some of the old systems and unlearning them and creating new ones so that we have an opportunity to heed the call of the IPCC, and we have an opportunity to save our climate and save Mother Earth for future generations. I think we all feel the pressure of that and all feel deeply committed to this effort, particularly when I read that it was their final warning to humanity to make this change, to make it struck a chord because I realized that what we've been doing before isn't working. So we have to do things differently. And for me, this conversation that we're having today of listening to the voices of wisdom of our ancestors and listening to the voices of wisdom of communities is really the way that we need to follow in order to make that shift and systems change. So thank you both so much.
You're
For
welcome.
being with us today. And I think we're going to transition at this point to a quick poll. With this conversation, we'd like to ask you the following question. Centering the voices of Indigenous, First Nations, and frontline communities is necessary to effectively create climate solutions for all. We'd like to know if you strongly agree somewhat, or not sure. Great, thank you. I'll give you guys a little bit of time because I know we have quite a diverse crowd tonight, and I'm not expecting everybody to be on the same page, but it is helpful to us so that we can be more resourceful to you in how we provide this information. And I really appreciate everybody's responses. So please don't be shy. Great. Thank you. It looks like the majority actually strongly agree. Some of you somewhat agree, 12%, and 2% are not sure how this is going to help us get to climate solutions. And I totally respect everybody's responses. And just know that CEMO and Liberty Hill and the speakers here tonight are here to make sure that if you have any follow-up questions, we would be here to answer them. So thank you. I guess, I don't know if Michelle or Andres, you have something to add, but I think that's the poll. So I'd like to.
Yes.
Go ahead.
The only thing I would add is that I learned so much from President Ortega this evening. I sure hope others did, and I hope that we can continue the conversation.
Yes, agreed, 100%. Definitely learned a lot. And even in just preparing for tonight, I learned quite a bit about the role of First People and our ancestors to create climate solutions for all. So now I'd like to switch over to our timeline and what is next for CEMO and the Climate Equity LA series. Great. So as mentioned earlier, the Climate Equity LA series is launching and we'll have one every month. Today was the launch. On April 27th, we'll have the community-driven climate resilience that will highlight community wisdom and experience with extreme heat to drive climate resilience and planning efforts. On May 25th, we'll have healthy homes and workers addressing heat impacts in Los Angeles. So we'll have folks share their experiences as outdoor workers, as tenants with extreme heat impacts and solutions that they want to offer. And for each one of these, we're going to have city leaders or other climate experts respond to the recommendations of the community experiences. On June 22nd, we're going to have the community-led heat relief awareness campaign information. So we're going to talk about community-led models for climate and heat relief awareness. We're going to speak about the importance of the community health educator promotora network model and how to drive community outreach and education, particularly for this summer as CEMO launches its largest heat relief campaign. And then finally, in June, we'll talk about extreme heat and climate adaptation planning, the dialogues on investment in extreme heat and climate adaptation policies to improve our early warning systems and our heat relief awareness programs. Because as mentioned earlier, the UCLA heat risk map showed us that excess deaths and excess hospitalizations happen in those hot zones where we have air pollution, where we have extreme heat, and where we have more health disparities and more economic historical disinvestments. On September 23rd, we're going to get together in person to convene and engage residents on community recommendations for our whole year of workshops. And that will lead to a report that will go to our Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission and our City Council to ensure those voices are integrated into policy and are providing advice to our City Council and influencing our City Council on how to create more equitable climate policy. And I don't want to leave out our extreme heat focus groups and surveys because we have a very significant effort in ensuring that we have a diverse group of Angelinos participating in our focus groups. And I want to thank everybody who's participating in that. And so this doesn't happen by accident. It happens with the support of a lot of individuals, so many people to thank, the Liberty Hill Foundation, my staff, the alliance of all the CBOs that are participating in the focus groups, the first people that are participating in the series and in the focus groups and the Climate Emergency Mobilization Commission. And I definitely want to thank the City Council and the Mayor's Office for supporting CEMO and its future endeavors to include meaningful engagement in the city of Los Angeles as we all attempt to create the most equitable climate policy in the nation, to be an example for others in the nation to follow. I think we have some time for Q&A, and I'm going to give my team a little bit of time to lift up any questions that might be out there. I'm not seeing any at the moment. Oh. Michelle? Oh, I thought you were good. Sorry.
Well, I do see a long comment and question from Joanne D'Antonio, but I need a minute to digest. So I don't know if there's an easier one.
Okay, it's about native trees.
Yes.
Can you ask planning department and the mayor to introduce large native trees as an element in the 100% affordable housing and not eliminate environmental reviews, because the current proposed amendments to waive site plan reviews will afford zero opportunity to let native trees support heat mitigation? Thank you for that question, Joanne D'Antonio. I can definitely bring up this issue with other city leaders. So thank you for bringing it up. I know that we have a chief urban forest officer, and they're working on shade equity and equitable placement of trees to ensure that we increase our trees where they're most needed for extreme heat and climate adaptation. And in fact, there's going to be a tree summit very soon. And I would definitely want to refer you to that office. And I'm learning a great deal from them in terms of how we best utilize not just native trees, but other trees, because our climate is changing and it's not the same that it was 50 years ago or even 25 years ago. So I think I've heard them say that it's important to look beyond our native trees to ensure that our trees have a larger survival rate in Los Angeles. But thank you for that question.
I'm shooting from the hip here a little bit, but I would just say that this might be an example of where your office, Marta, might be able to help with some creative problem solving between the affordable housing community, which I know is it's very complicated to build the pro formas in order to make the housing available for people who can't pay market rate. So that's the one constraint. At the same time, Joanne's point is so well taken. You know, we have to figure out how to green those spaces at the same time. So maybe it's a conversation between urban forestry and the housing division.
That's right. Yeah.
City.
Yeah, the city is really trying to unsilo all these conversations to ensure that we are taking a more holistic view of how we create equitable heat and climate adaptation. And this is an excellent example of the kind of conversations that need to be happening at the city, so we can integrate these types of solutions and wisdom from out there in the community. Great. Well, I'm not seeing my team point to any more questions unless oh, here we go. Q&A. Sorry, there's a whole list. There's a question from Alvin Waters. How much political representation is there demographically for Native Americans? Reason I ask is the most critical. Oops. I think I lost, you know how it moves around when. The reason I ask is the most critical piece and power of pushing change, in addition to advocacy, is continuing to get a seat at the local level, city, state, or federal. Being African American, that is a similar strategy we have to implement to get a seat at the table. Maybe President Ortega would like to address that. I think the question, and you have President Ortega, how much political representation is there demographically for Native people? And I assume he means here in Los Angeles.
I think that's a great question. And that's one of the things that among tribes and other tribal leaders we've been speaking towards is how do we get more folks to be elected into political power, into the seats that make a change in policy. Right now, we have one assembly member who's tribal from California at the Assembly State seat. We have none in City Council. We have none in LA County. But that's the thing that we want to do. We definitely, the tribes are looking at how do we bring our youth and encourage them, and those that wanted such roles, because we definitely need to be at the seat at those tables as well. But besides that, myself being like on the commission for the climate emergency, for me to take that role and encourage others like-minded to take other seats among other agencies. So it doesn't have to be an elected official position, but these commissions that make influence advice to these bodies. And I think that's the place for us to begin with. And some of us have taken this as well already. So that's the strategy as well. So that's a good question.
Thank you. And I know at the federal level, we've seen much more Native representation than in the past, especially at the Department of Interior. And that's an encouraging step forward. Andres, you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, we have one question here, and just based off of our timeline, I think this may be the last question. How is CEMO ensuring intergovernmental cooperation on climate?
You mean like outside of the city of Los Angeles? We are definitely in spaces outside of the city of Los Angeles and in conversations with the county and in conversations with the state of California. Our approach is a collaborative one, though. We don't have legislative power. We don't have executive power. What we have is the power of the people and the advocacy of the people to share with the county and to share with the state and to share that our role is to advocate for those voices and to unsilo government so that we can have these intergovernmental approaches that really support a seamless government for everyday people who don't have the time to disentangle all of the bureaucracy and red tape of government, but they just want results. So CEMO definitely sees itself as an advocate for community. And we have been pushing for example, in our public safety realm and emergency management realm, for a more health equity, people-centered approach for the deployment of resources during disasters, during extreme heat, during storm, so that we put public health at the center of the deployment of those resources. And we're prioritizing where there are greater disparities, greater health disparities, so that we have the resources available in those communities when we most need them, because we already know that when disaster strikes, it strikes the most vulnerable communities the most. So those are the kinds of conversations that are really valuable to have. And I think the Climate Equity LA series is one piece of it, but our future campaigns, including community voices, is another piece. And I can tell you that the government is listening to all of you and to all of us, and they are coming to CEMO from the federal government to the state government and asking us, how can we collaborate? How can we support a more equitable approach to the investment of resources in Los Angeles? And I turn to all of you to make sure that I'm saying what needs to be said and that we are sharing those resources equitably. So and honestly, even if you have executive power or legislative power, the best approach is always a collaborative one. Yeah. Andres.
Yeah. Oh, sorry about that, Marta. And we also have time actually for one more question. I also
Sure.
believe you had one last slide to go through in closing remarks, but I think this is a good question to continue. So there are over 600,000 rental units in Los Angeles that were built before 1978 that are ill-equipped to handle the increased heat. How do we get help from code enforcement and or building improvement incentives to mitigate this challenge without passing on the cost to rent burdened tenants?
Right. It's a very timely question. I was just on a panel, was it today or yesterday, addressing this issue. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of our presentation today, last year we focused on equitable building decarbonization. And as you mentioned, existing buildings, the older buildings are the ones that we really need to invest in and pay attention to. And when we're creating the decarbonization policy, because obviously it's not just a decarbonization policy, it's a healthy homes and healthy buildings policy. So everybody has the right to thermal comfort. Everybody has clean air inside of their homes. They're not being triggered. Their asthma's not being triggered. And their rent isn't being increased, and their energy utilities bills aren't a burden. So those are all recommendations within our equitable building decarbonization report. And I know that when the city council begins to reconsider building performance standards for affordable housing buildings, that those topics will be at the forefront of their decision-making process, especially with Mayor Bass's Executive Directive 1 and ensuring that we have housing secure Angelenos. We need to put those housing issues at the forefront of building decarbonization. We currently have a couple of pilot programs that the Department of Water and Power and the City of LA are funding, which we're learning from, for example, how to finance them, how to create more incentives, how to put together a funding package that could be sustainable in the long run, so we don't impact, affordable housing buildings as they become healthier, as they decarbonize, as they remove the gas lines, for example. But I think we were being cautious because the city of LA has learned from other cities who moved too quickly to decarbonize. So our approach is going to be to prioritize healthier homes, avoid displacement, and avoid impact on tenants, because those are really the sweet spots of creating healthy homes for Los Angeles. And I can only say that the city council is restarting those conversations about equitable building decarbonization. And we could make sure to put you on a notification system so that you get the alerts of when those conversations are happening. And so you can be a part of the solution as well.
Awesome.
Great. I think that was a great way to end today. And before we do, we want to alert you once again that you can register for our upcoming events. We're sending everybody on this email list that is at this workshop today these registration links. It's also on our website. And we're going to these are not just workshops, these are policy advisory workshops that will end up at City Council in a future report. So your voice in these workshops is going to be critical, and we hope to see you all there. And thank you all again for participating tonight, especially to President Rudy Ortega, Michelle Pritchard, Andres Gonzalez, Rebecca Guerra Day, Raymond, Natalie, the rest of the team, everybody who pulled it together. We're super grateful to all of you, and thank you once again.